two-door bedroom and a double-trigger shotgun, the murder that shattered a family. Rafter analysis. Hello, and welcome to 48 Hours True Crime. Today, we'll be examining the case of John and Karina Rafter. We'll begin with the background of the couple, move through the timeline of the homicide, and then take a closer look at the evidence before discussing what may have happened. John Richard Rafter was born on October 6, 1968, in New York. He grew up in Colonial Heights, Virginia, a city located about 23 miles south of Richmond. As an adult, John built a successful career at Capital One, starting in the company's call center before working his way up to become a master software engineer. He eventually settled in Powhatan County, where he owned a spacious 2,800 square foot home on Flint Hill Road. Situated on 3 acres of land, the property offered privacy and quiet surroundings, roughly 32 miles west of Richmond. In May 2001, John began a relationship with Karina. Karina was born in Poland in 1976. Her father was a physician who later moved the family to the Richmond area. During her teenage years, Karina developed a reputation for being rebellious. She dropped out of high school and, at just 18 years old, gave birth to a daughter named Maya. Maya's biological father played no role in raising her. Despite their very different backgrounds, John and Karina's relationship continued to grow, and the couple married in 2002. Although John never legally adopted Maya, he helped raise her as his own. The couple later had 2 children together, a son, Michael, born in 2003, and a daughter, Mila, born in 2004. From the outside, they appeared to be building a family. Behind closed doors, however, the marriage was becoming increasingly strained. Friends and relatives described Karina as the dominant personality in the relationship. Yet, according to many who knew her, alcohol was the force that ultimately controlled Karina. Her drinking became a central part of her life and had a profound impact on her behavior, creating constant tension within the household. Karina did not maintain a traditional full-time job, although she occasionally worked as a Polish-English translator. Much of her time was spent taking the children on vacations, while John remained home, working long hours to financially support the family. By 2006, the marriage had deteriorated to the point that John filed for divorce, a decision many believed was influenced by Karina's escalating alcohol abuse. Surprisingly, the separation did not last. Almost immediately after the divorce was finalized, the two reconciled and continued living together without remarrying for the next 8 years. Then, on November 8, 2014, John and Karina married each other for a second time. This time, both appeared determined to make the relationship work. At least on the surface, it seemed they believed they had overcome the problems that had destroyed their first marriage. But history soon began repeating itself. In July 2016, John filed for divorce once again. Several months earlier, Karina had already moved out of the family home and returned to live with her parents in Chesterfield County. By then, Maya had grown up and moved out to live with her romantic partner. The divorce quickly turned into a bitter custody battle over the couple's 2 younger children, 13-year-old Michael and 12-year-old Mila. Initially, both children remained with John. Later, Mila moved in with Karina. One of the major disputes between the parents centered on Mila's education. Karina wanted to homeschool her daughter, believing it would give them greater freedom to travel whenever they wished. According to the prosecution, she viewed traditional school attendance as an obstacle to the lifestyle she wanted. Now, let's move to the timeline of the crime. At approximately 8:45 a.m. on December 9, 2016, 13-year-old Michael called 911 in a state of panic. "Please help me," he told the dispatcher. "My dad is dead. I don't know what to do. Please come help me." The operator asked whether John was still breathing. Michael's response was chilling. "No, he's dead. His whole face is gone. I don't think he's alive." When officers arrived at the residence, they discovered 48-year-old John Rafter lying on his back in bed. He was fully clothed, covered by the blankets, with his hands resting across his chest. He had suffered 2 devastating shotgun wounds to the left side of his head. Lying beside him on the bed was a 16-gauge side-by-side double-barrel shotgun. Both spent shotgun shells remained inside the chambers. A 16-gauge shotgun occupies the middle ground between the more common 12-gauge and the lighter 20-gauge. Once a popular hunting firearm because of its balance between manageable recoil and effective power, it has become less common over the years. Nevertheless, both the firearms and ammunition remain commercially available. Investigators quickly made an unusual discovery. The shotgun was equipped with 2 separate triggers, one for each barrel. Forensic examination indicated that both barrels had been discharged simultaneously. In other words, whoever fired the weapon had pulled both triggers at exactly the same time. Investigators immediately began reconstructing John's final hours. Michael told detectives that the last time he saw his father alive was around 11 p.m. on December 8. Before going to bed, the two had made plans to play a video game together the following morning before John drove Michael to school. Evidence later showed that John was still alive several hours after Michael went to sleep. At approximately 1 a.m. on December 9, a text message was sent from John's phone, indicating that he had been awake at that time. When officers examined the phone, they noticed something else. John's alarm was still set for 6 a.m., and it was actively sounding when police arrived. He had never turned it off, suggesting he was already dead before it went off. Based on the available evidence, investigators concluded that John was most likely killed sometime between 1 a.m. and 6 a.m. Michael also recalled hearing a loud bang early that morning. Still half asleep, he assumed nothing was wrong and drifted back to sleep. When he woke later, he realized something was unusual. His father had failed to wake him for school, something John normally did every day. Concerned, Michael walked into his father's bedroom and made the horrifying discovery that led to his frantic 911 call. One detail immediately caught investigators' attention. Although the shotgun was lying on the bed next to John's body, Michael never mentioned seeing it during his emergency call. When detectives later questioned him about the weapon, Michael insisted he had not noticed any shotgun on the bed. He also believed there were no firearms kept inside the home. As the crime scene examination continued, investigators uncovered another surprising piece of evidence. Hidden beneath John's pillow was a hatchet. Detectives believed John had placed it there because he feared for his personal safety and wanted some form of protection while he slept. Because Michael had been inside the house throughout the night, investigators initially considered the possibility that he might have been responsible for his father's death. That theory, however, was quickly dismissed. After examining the physical evidence and interviewing witnesses, detectives ruled Michael out as a viable suspect. John's stepdaughter, Maya, was also investigated but was eliminated from consideration early in the case. With those possibilities excluded, investigators focused on the person who appeared to have the strongest motive, John's estranged wife, Karina Rafter. When questioned by police, Karina provided an important piece of background information. She explained that about a year before John's death, he had experienced severe depression and had expressed suicidal thoughts. According to Karina, John's mental health counselor contacted her and asked her to remove John's 16-gauge shotgun from the home as a safety precaution. Karina said she collected the firearm and stored it at her parents' house, where she kept it for nearly a year. Eventually, John asked for the shotgun to be returned. Karina claimed he told her it was a valuable antique and wanted it back. Although she said she initially worried about giving him access to the weapon again, his counselor reportedly assured her that John's mental health had significantly improved. As a result, on November 30, 2016, just 9 days before the shooting, Karina returned the shotgun to John. According to her account, John noticed that the ammunition was missing. Karina said she had accidentally misplaced the original shells, so she went to a local Walmart, purchased a new box of 16-gauge shotgun ammunition, and left it in John's garage. At the time, that explanation appeared straightforward. But as investigators continued digging into the evidence, that seemingly ordinary purchase would become one of the prosecution's most important pieces of evidence. Over the following months, detectives painstakingly assembled a circumstantial case against Karina. While the investigation continued, Karina attempted to move on with her life. She eventually relocated to Florida. More than 2 years passed before authorities believed they had enough evidence to file charges. On February 6, 2019, Approximately 2 years and 3 months after John's death, a grand jury indicted Karina Rafter for first-degree murder. She voluntarily surrendered to law enforcement and was later released after posting a $50,000 bond. Her trial began in October 2019. Throughout the proceedings, the defense argued that the investigation had overlooked other possible suspects. Most notably, defense attorneys suggested that Michael could have been responsible for his father's death. At the same time, they emphasized that Karina herself strongly opposed placing suspicion on her own son and had never wanted that argument presented before the jury. After hearing weeks of testimony, the jury reached its decision. On Friday, October 25, 2019, Karina Rafter was found guilty of first-degree murder, along with the use of a firearm during the commission of a felony. Under Virginia law, first-degree murder carries a sentence ranging from a minimum of 20 years to life imprisonment. In Karina's case, the jury recommended the minimum sentence. She received 20 years for the murder conviction, plus the mandatory consecutive 3-year sentence for the firearm offense, resulting in a total prison term of 23 years. Based on her projected release date, Karina is expected to leave prison on March 19, 2040, when she will be approximately 64 years old. With the timeline now complete, we can turn to the central question that continues to divide those who have followed this case. Karina Rafter has consistently maintained that she is innocent. She also has a small but vocal group of supporters who argue that the prosecution never proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt. There was no confession, no eyewitness, no surveillance footage, and no direct forensic evidence placing Karina at the moment of the shooting. Virginia prosecutors openly acknowledged that their case was entirely circumstantial. Their argument was simple. While no single piece of evidence proved Karina's guilt on its own, the totality of the evidence pointed to only one reasonable conclusion: that she was the only person who could have committed the murder. So, was Karina Rafter truly guilty? To answer that question, let's examine the evidence both supporting and challenging the prosecution's theory. Let's begin with the evidence that supports the prosecution's theory of guilt. John and Karina's marriage had been deeply troubled for years. Their relationship followed a turbulent cycle of marriage, divorce, reconciliation, remarriage, and ultimately another bitter divorce. By the time of John's death, the marriage appeared beyond repair. One of the biggest sources of conflict was Karina's long-standing alcohol abuse. According to court records, her drinking had repeatedly created serious problems within the family. On December 27, 2015, less than a year before John's death, John discovered that Karina had been consuming NyQuil as a substitute for alcohol. He planned to report the incident to her Alcoholics Anonymous sponsor. Karina reacted violently. She physically attacked John, was arrested, and was eventually convicted of assault and battery against a family member. Interestingly, jurors never heard about this prior domestic violence conviction during the murder trial. When John was killed, the couple was also engaged in an increasingly hostile custody dispute involving their 2 children. The divorce had become emotionally charged, and both parents were fighting over who would retain primary custody. Another significant point involved the murder weapon itself. About a year before the shooting, Karina had taken possession of John's 16-gauge shotgun after concerns were raised about his mental health. According to her own statements, she later returned the firearm at John's request. However, she also admitted that she had misplaced the original ammunition. Instead of asking John to purchase replacement shells himself, Karina went to Walmart and bought a new box of 16-gauge ammunition. That decision raised an obvious question. If John wanted the shotgun back so badly, why didn't he simply buy his own ammunition? Investigators found the explanation difficult to accept. More importantly, forensic examination revealed that the only identifiable fingerprints on the Walmart shopping bag containing the shotgun shells belonged to Karina. The timing was equally significant. On the very same day she purchased the ammunition, November 30, 2016, Karina received an email from her divorce attorney warning that the upcoming divorce proceedings were likely to become extremely contentious. Just 3 days before the murder, another emotionally important event occurred. Karina had lunch with Maya. During that conversation, Maya told her mother that if she were ever called to testify during the custody proceedings, she intended to support John rather than Karina. Only 4 days later, John was dead. The timing naturally attracted investigators' attention. Detectives also learned something unusual about Karina's behavior after the separation. Despite moving out of the marital home, she frequently entered the house late at night without notifying John. Because she still legally owned part of the property, John had no legal way to prevent her from coming inside. One incident in September 2016 particularly stood out. Around 3 a.m., Karina quietly entered the house while John was asleep and took their daughter, Mila, without waking him. The following morning, John panicked when he discovered Mila was missing. He searched frantically throughout the house, even checking inside the clothes dryer, before realizing she was gone. That incident demonstrated something important. Karina was capable of entering and leaving the home during the middle of the night without alerting anyone inside. John's bedroom layout made that possibility even more concerning. Unlike a typical bedroom, it had 2 separate entrances. One door opened directly into the main hallway. The second connected directly to the garage. That detail became extremely important because the replacement shotgun shells Karina had purchased were stored in the garage. According to the prosecution's theory, Karina could have quietly entered through the garage, loaded the shotgun, walked directly into John's bedroom through the connecting door, fired the fatal shots, and left the same way within minutes. Friends later testified that John had become increasingly fearful of Karina. He reportedly told several people that if anything ever happened to him, Karina would be responsible. Because he was not legally allowed to change the locks on the house while the divorce was pending, he had even considered installing padlocks on the doors leading into his bedroom. Investigators also questioned another inconsistency. If Karina had truly returned John's shotgun, as she claimed, why was John sleeping with a hatchet hidden beneath his pillow? Even more puzzling, John had reportedly discussed purchasing another firearm shortly before his death. Why would he be looking for another gun if he already had possession of the shotgun? The prosecution argued that these details suggested John either did not consider the shotgun a reliable means of protection or perhaps didn't actually have access to it in the way Karina described. The medical evidence also worked against the theory of suicide. Investigators concluded it would have been extraordinarily difficult, if not physically impossible, for John to fire both triggers of the side-by-side shotgun simultaneously while positioning the barrels against the side of his own head. His body position also raised questions. When officers found him, both of his hands rested calmly across his chest beneath the blanket. That posture was difficult to reconcile with the violent recoil expected from simultaneously firing both barrels of a double-barrel shotgun. Karina's own movements during the estimated time of the murder also attracted significant attention. Between approximately 1 a.m. and 6 a.m., the window in which investigators believed John was killed, Karina admitted she left her parents' house. She claimed she drove to Walmart to purchase medicine for Maya. Investigators noticed something else. During that same 5-hour period, there was virtually no activity recorded on Karina's cell phone. Prosecutors argued that the lack of phone activity suggested she intentionally left the phone behind to avoid creating a digital record of her movements. Her statements after John's death also appeared inconsistent. Karina told investigators she had no interest in reconciling with John. Yet text messages recovered from both phones painted a very different picture. Those messages showed Karina repeatedly pleading with John to cancel the divorce and give their marriage another chance. She appeared desperate to repair the relationship. For prosecutors, that contradiction undermined her credibility. Forensic testing provided another potentially damaging piece of evidence. Only hours after the shooting, investigators tested Karina for gunshot residue. One particle consistent with gunshot residue was found on one of her hands. In addition, gloves recovered from her vehicle also contained particles that were consistent with gunshot residue. Although none of these findings conclusively proved she had fired a weapon, prosecutors argued they were consistent with someone who had recently handled or discharged a firearm. Finally, investigators pointed to Karina's reaction after learning of John's death. After discovering his father's body, Michael sent a text message to his sister Mila warning her to stay away from their mother. At that moment, Neela's phone happened to be in Karina's possession. She saw the message. Yet she never responded. Witnesses testified that Karina was an extremely frequent texter, someone who constantly communicated by text throughout the day. Given those habits, investigators found it unusual that she ignored such a shocking message immediately after learning her estranged husband had been killed. Individually, none of these circumstances proved murder.